Welcome. This podcast is an exploration into being human and what's possible when there's less attention on the noise in our heads. Warning. While listening to this broadcast, you may experience moments of deep peace, sighs of relief, personal insights, or long stretches of dead air. Do not be afraid. This is normal. Under the Noise with Wyn Morgan and Kate Roberts. Welcome to Under the Noise. This is episode 3 with me, Wyn Morgan, and Kate Roberts. That was a very eloquent introduction, Kate. A little laugh. and then a last slightly louder one and a longer one. You had an idea about what you thought would be really cool to talk about, and I loved the idea too. So take it away.
So after class this morning, I had a thought that I wonder, what you and I are going to talk about today for our third episode of Under the Noise. And I kind of go back naturally into our conversations that we've had before. And if anything new is kind of showing up for me, and I've been reading a book recently about creativity and going back to what the author will call point zero. And in point zero in this space is where we kind of get out of our heads, out of our intellect, where we meet our own sense of intuitive creativity and our knowing and our intuition. So the author, she calls it point zero. And what I love about what I'm reading so far that really kind of has me interested is, first of all, how little time I spend in that space where my intellect, my personal mind isn't making a decision for me, isn't taking over, isn't telling a story, isn't rehashing conversations, or I spend very little time. Oh, and another thing that's very dominant in that intellect is comparisons with how other people do it or how other people say it, or write about it, discuss it, whatever it is that I'm working on at the moment. And so there's a should factor that shows up on everything. And I know that's from my intellect, my personal mind. And so it's interesting to me to hear this author talk about what shows up in that space when I get out of the way. And I spend very little time there. And so that space feels really interesting to me right now. And so after class this morning, when I was thinking about what we would talk about, I just had the thought, well, maybe I'll, see what Wyn thinks about that topic, because that seems kind of fun right now.
And I said yes. Sounds like fun. And what do you notice then, since you had the thought about that might be a good thing for us to discuss? What was it about that that's so alluring to you?
If I'm being honest, the unknown, I feel like it's been calling me my whole life. Now, granted, I've listened to it very little, but when I think about the unknown space and all the possibility that shows up in that, like it's always seemed like it's drawing me, like it's a pull. And so anyone that plays in that space of the unknown, I always find that I'm more interested in hearing what that person talks about or what they interpret that to be, that space, and what comes out of that space without attachment to it, without needing it to be something predetermined. You know, I feel like in my life I've always, I create, but I create with the end result. I always create with the end result in my mind. And then it's almost like I work backwards from there instead of showing up in a completely new, unknown space. And I'm sure it's about control and all that stuff that makes us feel safe, right? But I know that that's my tendency, is to want to work backwards, but I'm still absolutely fascinated by what's possible when you just show up in the unknown. I love it. Yeah. So as a topic, it's something that not only interests me, but I want to play in that space more, not only in my business, but, my personal life and even just me personally alone, because anything happens in that space. And maybe I'm bored with what my mind can come up with. I'd like to see what else is there.
I had so much value and currency on what I already knew, and value and currency on being right, that I had ignored fresh, new, and the unknown for decades and decades. And I've been astonished with the possibility of the unknown and fresh. Literally have been. And the beauty of what can show up in that place has been, and I'm not an expert in this at all, I'd say, but the little that I've seen about it, what that's brought me has been astonishing. Mm-hmm. I was talking to one of my mentors about this about a week ago. And I said to her, I said, the one thing I notice with you is when you're working with people, you go into the unknown all the time. Because I do, but for a long time I didn't. And then we talked about how did it change? That she was always going back to the old and to the known and to the knowledge and to the intellect. And she said, well, the reason that I fought into the unknown, fought the space and the truth of going really under the noise, was I did not want to let go of what I already knew, because it was comforting. It was a false comfort, she said, but it was still a comfort. And when I did let go of what I knew and what I thought, I had no idea what would show up. But now it's just kind of obvious to me that the taste of yesterday's good ideas tastes stale. And therefore, I've got an appetite for fresh and new. And it makes no sense for me to go back to the old. And I just thought, that's everyday creativity, every day the unknown in real time for her. And it was a wonderful, in my mind, description of what it might take for us as humans to spend more time there, is to let go of the comfort of the control, the comfort of the known, diving into the unknown. But I also know for her as well, and she talked about this briefly with me, to say that I had to know that what I was diving into in the unknown was the answer I was always looking for. I kind of suspected it was. And I dove in a bit, and then I noticed, oh, wait a minute. This tastes so much better. This is... And at some point, she said, and you know, using her hands to kind of describe it, I just noticed that this was tasted better, tasted sweeter, was more real, and was a wonderful place in my work with people and in my own life. And all of a sudden, it was an easy thing to quit the stale.
So she had to know that what she would find there in the unknown was an answer that she'd been looking for. It's kind of tricky because you don't know until you're there that that's the answer. So she had to play in it.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And going back to something that you said a few minutes ago about in your business, it's so, I think, compelling to keep going with what we know in business. And a huge area of the corporate clients that I work with is best practices. It's said slightly differently in different parts of the world, either best practice or best practices. And the sharing and implementing of best practice and best practices being the thing that will get them to where they want to be in their results and their people and everything. And while I get that at some level, but best practice is always yesterday's best idea, not today's. And today's best idea will be better than yesterday's. Another way of saying the unknown, of letting creativity and fresh ideas come. Now, for organizing hundreds of and maybe tens of thousands of people, best practice might be a good idea, but it still is a retread. It's still nothing better than that. It isn't innovative. And I'm not dismissing the notion of best practices, but it's good to know what they're good for and where the limitations are. And in my own life, to notice that I'm probably not going to find a new way of tying my shoelaces. Maybe that's fine for that. Maybe that's yesterday's good idea that I've probably had for 45 years. But there are lots of other things in my life that are worth a fresh look. And most of those things, I don't even know what they are. They will occur to me and will keep occurring to me when I'm less so tied up in my own stale thinking. So a quick example would be someone that you and I both know in his business will literally tear up the way of doing something even when it's successful, and will purposely tear it up for the sake of tearing it up and starting fresh and new. This worked brilliantly. Let's start again. I admire that guy so much for doing that. And he knows that let's start again is always better. I just love that. It's one of the most fundamental things I respect about this person and the way that he works. Now, it's not always great for everyone in the team. We're just getting the hang of it. I know, let's do it. Let's go again. And yet what ends up happening is something more impactful and more wonderful than before every time.
So how do you think that squares with the idea, especially in business, is that when you got something that works and you spend the time and you get better at it and you get better at it and you get better at it, with scrapping everything you did and starting new again?
One thing I've noticed in business is that they've learned. I can't remember the exact phrase. It'll come to me in a moment. Incremental gains. Incremental gains, and it's been around in sports and in human performance in that field. Probably for at least, I'd say, 6 to 10 years. And it will be the little things that make the difference, and some of the small things will make the difference in winning or losing. Let's say in cycling, in world class cycling, in Tour de France and so forth. And the Olympics of cycling. It's various disciplines of cycling at the Olympics. That's been kind of quite well known. And when businesses adopt the same idea of incremental gains, they get incremental results. And I've been talking to quite a few businesses in the last sort of 18 years that they want to 10x their business. It's become quite in vogue. Well, I know one thing: incremental gains does not get 10x. You will not grow a business by incremental gains and a retread of yesterday's best idea. To change things, it takes fresh and the letting go of old. And old got us here. It won't get us there. There's a book that it's been around now for 14 years, I think. And it's what got you here won't get you there. It's worthwhile remembering that as a notion. Marshall Goldsmith was the writer. It's a really lovely book. And he lives by that notion of shaking up people, and he's primarily working as a coach in business. And that literally is the credo of, yeah, what got you here won't get you there. And there's an organization that I've known for quite a while, and I've been dipping in there at various parts of their organization 20 years. And they have been at times brilliant at tearing things up and then getting huge gains and huge wins. And then have been so at various times on various parts of their company, so risk averse. And you can feel it in the people. And they just become. I'm talking to the head of learning and development in one country last year, and he said people have just got scared. And it's not an external thing. When he said this is an internal within the company, our culture has become risk averse, and it's doing us a lot of, it's not doing us any good, he said. It's become way analytical. Zero entrepreneurial spirit going on. And no one brings fresh ideas to the table because we're too afraid.
I feel like at least in what I'm starting to see about this space, not just in business, but showing up in this space, even with people, family, friends, people that I've known, and what that looks like if I show up in the unknown with another person. And what I see is that when I let go of, all my ideas about who they are, who they've been, or and just show up with them, they meet me there. And maybe they don't think about it in the same way, and maybe it's not something that is intentional, or maybe they're even aware of. But when I start to play in that space, people almost naturally meet me there in a conversation. Or a new question occurs to me to ask them, Or just not needing to do the same thing over and over, or say the same thing over and over. And all of a sudden I realize my relationships have moved into a new space as well. Sometimes with people I've known my whole life. And that's unique.
It's worthwhile highlighting something that you said there, in my mind anyway, that fresh doesn't come from out there. You know what I mean? So in other words, that let me say that more clearly. Fresh comes from here, from our seeing. It doesn't have to mean that out there things have to change. So to the example that you just shared, the relationship has changed with people I've known my entire life. They didn't do the changing. You didn't have to tear them up for the freshness to appear. It was from within. That's gorgeous to know and to really know. You know, dropping into that presence. And as you were saying it, a memory came back to me of being on holiday, on vacation with a dear friend of mine, and her and I were chatting on in a park, I think, or just by the side of the beach. And it was just remarkable to me, and I'd known her for quite a while, even then. And I looked at her in a way that all my past thinking about her dropped away, and I just saw something far more deep, beyond the form of what I'd ever thought about her before. And she hadn't changed, but the way of my seeing totally had. It was really amazing and deep and meaningful. Well, if there's anything from this conversation that struck a chord with you, we'd love to hear. And there's ways of getting in touch with us that you'll hear in a moment. But also, if there's anything that you think you'd love to share in this podcast with Kate and myself, then let us know. We'd love to have you on as a guest. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being here, Kate.
Thanks, man.
And enjoy. See you soon.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and review. If you have a topic or question that you'd like us to chat about, email Wyn or Kate at wyn@winning.co.uk and Kate at katerobertscoaching.com. Until then, enjoy what's possible under the noise.